Hello and welcome to Press TV's News Analysis with me, Homa Lesgi. Today has been described as the day Palestine was reborn. Representatives of 13 Palestinian groups, including the two main factions, Fatah and Hamas, have finally signed a reconciliation deal as they prepare to form a single government.
Representatives of 13 Palestinian groups, including Hamas and Fatah, as well as independent political figures, struck the landmark deal in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. The deal paves the way for parliamentary and presidential elections within a year. It also requires the formation of a unity government and a higher security council. The council is to integrate forces of both Hamas and Fatah. Scenes of jubilation in the besieged Gaza Strip a day before the Palestinian factions signed the unity deal.
We are just too happy with this. We trust the two parties, and then we want the actual action from them. We don't want the media or the papers of the conferences there in Egypt. We have the actual activities.
Similar scenes were also seen in the occupied West Bank. The unity deal has angered Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called on the acting Palestinian Authority chief Mahmoud Abbas to cancel the deal. Tel Aviv says it would not cooperate with a Palestinian government that includes Hamas as a member. Fatah has strongly defended the deal. The head of the Fatah delegation in Cairo slammed Netanyahu's remarks as unacceptable interference. The chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Shaath, has also sharply criticized the Israeli regime for Netanyahu's meddling remarks.
I don't think that Israel has any right to poke its nose in our internal affairs. Israel has signed agreements with us in the contractual nature with the PLO. We honor our agreement, and Israel should honor its agreements. And Israel has no right to interfere in our affairs. And Netanyahu was saying that who shall I make peace with, Gaza and the West Bank, and he knows that without reconciliation we can't have peace. So he's seeking pretexts. This Israeli government is only seeking a pretext to avoid implementing its obligation emanating from the roadmap and other commitments.
So, what does this unity mean for the Palestinian cause? Are we closer to an official recognition of the state of Palestine? And how is Israel planning to act? Well, joining us now to help us find some answers is editor of Culture Wars magazine, Maikel Jones, live in South Bend, Indiana. And I'd also like to welcome journalist Richard Millet, live in London for us, plus author and Middle East expert Saeb Shaath in Belfast. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us. And I'll start my first question with Mr. Saeb Shaath in Belfast. Mr. Saeb Shaath, how will the unity deal influence the Palestinian cause? And of course, by that we mean the core issues that have been raised by the Palestinians.
The signing the Palestinian deal today is a sign of the Palestinian resistance is grabbing the initiative right now and pushing the resistance agenda at the minute. And that in its own is in the rhythm with the Arab Revolution and the demands of the Palestinian people. Because the two factions in here, Hamas and Fatah, if they didn't come to a unity government and settle their differences now and in the future, they would be, both of them in history, they will be outdated and they don't meet any of the people's demand, which, as I said, in a rhythm with the Arab Revolution. And we can see the influence the new Egyptian revolution had on the military junta in Egypt who runs the country, and taking a positive stand from the two Palestinian sides, the same, balanced from Fatah and Hamas. And that's in its own put a pressure on the Palestinians to unify. And the Egyptian told them they cannot open in the Rafah crossing without a unified Palestinian government. And the Egyptians seen the unification and the Palestinian cause as well as a matter of Egyptian national security. That shows the agenda in Egypt is changing, and Egypt now pushing toward an international peace conference away from the old-style negotiations and management of the conflict. The Egyptians focusing right now on an international conference which will deal with the core issues, with the refugees, with the Palestinians, with all UN resolution and decisions being taken on behalf of the Palestinian people to be implemented. And we can see as well the other side, Hamas as well was wary from the situation in Syria and didn't know what's going to happen in the future, so they compromise in here with each other, which strategically is in putting the ball in the Palestinian side and the Palestinian resistance.
All right, let's go to Richard Millet now in London to get his views on this. Richard, let's talk about the Israeli position that's been taken on this. We're hearing the comments that have been made by Benjamin Netanyahu and others. Some observers, meanwhile, are saying that Israel will rather have an excuse now not to even talk about any peace, and that this will actually be a relief for Netanyahu, because he'd say now we won't be able to speak with that government because Hamas is in it, and this will work for it because it's not looking for peace because of its, of course, continued settlement activities. Would you agree with that point of view?
Well, Homer, I think that Israel's got a valid argument. Everyone could lay that excuse at Israel's feet, that Israel doesn't want to negotiate for peace, but Israel has accepted the two-state solution. Israel accepts a future Palestinian state, but subject to Israel having secure borders with Jerusalem as its capital. And Hamas, which is one half of this agreement, does not accept the existence of Israel at all. It's said that this agreement with Fatah will not include any negotiations with Israel. And Hamas has recently said, Ismail Haniyeh has recently said over the weekend, that the Jewish sovereign presence is illegitimate. So there is nothing really to discuss with Hamas. And Hamas is a terrorist, a recognised terrorist organisation by the European Union, by America, and worldwide in the main. And there's no way that an entity like Hamas that is firing rockets repeatedly into Israel is suddenly going to make peace.
All right, the issue that was raised there by Richard Millet, I'd like to put the next question to Mr. Jones, who's also joining us. And I'd just like to point this fact, Richard, that at the same time Hamas in this unity government has said, and a spokesman earlier on telling Press TV as well, that they would support negotiations that would be led by Mahmoud Abbas, even in the context of this unity government, if the results of those talks would be put to a vote, to a referendum, or would be put rather to the Palestinian Legislative Council. So, of course, what Hamas would agree to is the creation of a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, and that's exactly what Israel has been showing that it does not want yet. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Jones here, what do you think, Mr. Jones, will be the fate of those core issues, including the establishment of a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the issue of refugees, borders, and of course the rest of it?
Well, I think this is an indication of how the Arab Spring, and especially the revolution in Egypt, has changed the whole political landscape in the Middle East. We've eliminated a logjam, a roadblock, simply by the fact that Egypt entered into this discussion. This shows the power of having a real representative government as opposed to a puppet government involved in sham negotiations. When Hamas was elected to office in Gaza in 2007, Israel declared them a terrorist state, a terrorist organization, and by doing that they divided the Palestinian people. Now that the Palestinian people have united and called for new elections, the shoe is on the other foot. The tables have been turned. Now it's Israel which is the state which is divided, and Israel has been now weakened by this, especially by the action of the Egyptian government by opening the Rafah border crossing, which will now allow the free flow of goods in and out of Gaza. So sensing this, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu tried to form a parallel unity government with Tzipi Levy, and she turned him down. So now the shoe is on the other foot. Now it's Likud that's isolated in the position that Hamas used to be in, and we have a whole new prospect, I think, for peace in the Middle East. All a result of the Arab Spring, I would say.
Right, Mr. Shaath, what kind of action do you think from now on Israel will be engaging in the face of this unity government?
Let me just answer Mr. Millet about accusing Hamas and the rest of terrorism here. The new EU law of terrorism and the Patriotic Act of the United States of America came after the 11th of September attacks and the boogeyman Osama bin Laden, which now they finished their battle and they killed him. And since then, the whole laws of the EU of identifying terrorist or what is a terrorist group and the American law as well is contradicting the international humanitarian laws, contradicting Geneva Convention about allowing and identifying a liberation movement, how to fight legitimately for their own country. And the biggest example in here about the case of Patrick McManus in Denmark, the spokesman of the group called Liberato, I think, in Denmark, when they couldn't put him in jail because he supported the PFLP, Palestine Front Liberation, financially, since the court in Denmark just a few months ago released him because he was right to support people defending their lands and fighting against occupation. So you have a problem here, the Israelis and the Americans, with imposing laws because of the 11th September. This has nothing to do with us. You cannot accuse us of terrorism when we are fighting an entity, artificial entity like Israel. And we have to fight it, and we're going to get our rights back. How Israel, your question, going to deal with the Palestinians on this? Straight away they started. Netanyahu started to meddle with the Palestinians. He's trying to freeze the tax money, the Palestinian tax money, which is according to the Paris Economical Accord of 1994, have to go through the Israelis and then they give it back to the Palestinians. An average the European handed to the Israelis in controlling the lives of the Palestinians. The same thing, the United States of America as well will try to pressurize things. They showed their dismay about the unity Palestinian. They believe in divide and conquer policies here to keep the West Bank separated from Gaza and to keep puppets for them in the West Bank, which they failed. As Mahmoud Abbas, he said himself about Obama, he put me in top of the tree with him and they put for him a ladder and he came down and he left me up there about the settlements issue. So the United States of America now cannot pressurize the Palestinians to accept the quartet conditions. It's weak in the Middle East right now, cannot impose any solution, and Israel now, they don't know what to do. The Palestinians have the initiatives right now, and the Palestinian resistance agenda is on the march, supported by the Arab Revolution.
All right, let's go to Richard now. Richard Millet, Israel has been accused of, quote, ordering the EU and US not to recognize the Hamas government when it won elections. Do you think that now, with the formation of this single Palestinian government, it will order them not to recognize that government as well?
Well, Israel can't order anyone. They can just negotiate, and I think that reasonable countries like those in the EU and America will recognise Hamas for what they are. My friend before me, if he read the Hamas Charter, he would see it's an out-and-out terrorist organisation that calls for the killing of Jews, not just for the eradication of the Jewish state, specifically Jewish people. And that is what Hamas is. It has no negotiation possibility within it. Its one aim is the destruction of Israel. It sends suicide bombings into Israel restaurants and cafes and discos, killing innocent people who are just out for a pizza or out for a Saturday night out. And that is what Hamas is. So what is there? I mean, your friends could, my colleagues
and
could
what the Israeli army is when killing over 1,400 people in Gaza, a state, not an organization. So if you want to talk major, you talk here. 1,400 people, most of them children, being killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, an army, and there are criminal war acts being identified by the United Nations. Humanitarian agencies. So don't start accusing people of terrorism when they are fighting to liberate their country from occupation. They are entitled to defend themselves and to fight to liberate their country from a Zionist occupation.
All right, the stance is made clear there by two of our guests. I'd like to go back to the question of how the West is going to react to this unity government and, of course, how Israel is going to be influential on that. And I'd like to go to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, already we're hearing on the 27th of April, the Washington Post quoted Congress as saying that the message of Congress to the Palestinian Authority is no U.S. aid if you merge with Hamas, and that U.S. taxpayer funds, quote, should not and must not be used to support those who threaten U.S. security, our interest and our vital ally Israel. What kind of measures do you think will the United States and Europe take toward the new Palestinian government?
Well, I think it's not a question of what you would like to do. It's a question of whether you're going to recognize a whole new situation. I mean, the famous Iranian example I can come up with is Cyrus, when he lost his ships, he had the sea flogged with chains. It didn't do any good, but I mean, I think we're talking about flogging the sea with chains here. We're talking about a fundamental change in the political situation in the Middle East that was in many ways brought about by the United States when it invaded Iraq under this neocon hegemony in our foreign policy. And that brought an element of destabilization that has been spreading through ever since, and we're seeing it right now. So they have to come to grips with that political situation, with that political reality. And telling them, ordering these people what to do is not going to change. That's flogging the sea with chains. It's not going to change the political realities on the ground. They have to come to grips.
Well, if this goes to the United Nations, Mr. Jones,
has to come to grips with the new situation there.
If this does come to the United Nations, if there is an effort to recognize the state of Israel with this unity government in place, what will the options be, do you think, of the United States if it does try to protect its ally?
Well, it can engage in vetoes again, but I mean, every time it engages in a veto, it discredits itself. A veto of this sort, because it's claiming to be in favor of democracy at the same time. Well, this is what democracy is in the Middle East. Either you're going to be for democracy or you're going to be for the status quo in the state of Israel. We've reached a crossroads. We've reached a parting of the ways, and the Obama administration is going to have to decide where they stand now.
All right, Mr. Shaath, I'd like to come back to you. Will the unity deal lead to UN membership or facilitate that process of recognition of a state of Palestine within the 1967 borders?
It will. They will get a recognition from the United Nations General Council, but at the same time, I don't think this is a huge, important issue to the Palestinians. The issue is implementing that on the ground and pushing the major players in here, which are the United States of America and Israel, which they are the only two countries going to be isolated from the whole world. Europe as a whole, even with the conservative government in Britain, I expect they're going to recognize the state of Palestine run by the unity government, because this is the public opinion in Europe backing that sort of move, and they are fed up from following the United States downhill in the Middle East, because they seen in the action what that causes. And now the Palestinians they getting sovereign on their own decisions. They don't let anybody take their decisions for them like used to be in the West Bank just a month ago, or in Egypt a couple of months ago. So the situation in the future is, United States and Israel alone, they're going to just boycott this unity government. But the rest of the world will recognize and will deal with this unity government.
Right.
And when this unity government shows the United States of America it's applying the international laws and standards and norms, the United States of America will have to move toward dealing with it. So it will be Israel alone who is in the loop in here.
Mr. Millet, would you say that Israel's choices will be limited if it wants to prevent that UN recognition, if it wants to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state within those 1967 borders?
Well, I mean, there's not going to be much of a change if there is a General Assembly resolution that recognises a Palestinian state. A General Assembly resolution, by the way, is not binding. It won't hold any force. So we've already got a Palestine delegation at the United Nations, and Israel's a very strong economy. It's a very strong country. Israel will not be isolated at all. The EU is one of Israel's biggest trading partners. Many countries have to buy their technology, their science, their medical sectors from Israel. A lot of countries rely on Israel for a lot of trade. So Israel's not going to be isolated. It might look good in the United Nations. But let's see if this actually gets to anywhere. Hamas and Fatah have got a year to get to elections. The last time they formed unity, they fell apart, and Hamas slaughtered hundreds of Fatah activists in Gaza. So there is not a very good history of success between Fatah and Hamas, because Fatah rejects the Islamist hardcore ideology.
Let's just give the last minute now to Mr. Jones as well to have his view on this. Mr. Jones, I'd like to share your thoughts with us on that. Do you think that this unity deal will be binding, will be strong enough, and it will affect the future?
Yeah, I don't think we should limit ourselves to legalistic considerations here. There's a huge groundswell of popular opinion throughout the world that this peace needs to come to this area of the world, and I think we have a step toward peace here. We have a legitimate step towards peace now that the Arab nations have been freed from these puppet governments and can apply themselves to the peace process by doing things like opening the border crossings. So I think it's a very hopeful moment, and I think it's time that America cut itself loose from the failed policies of the past and started working for real peace there.
Okay, in South Bend, Indiana, Dr. Eugene Michael Jones talking to us, the editor of Culture Wars magazine. A big thank you as well to Richard Millet, journalist in London, and Dr. Saeb Shaath, author and Middle East expert, live in Belfast for us. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks very much for staying on this edition of News Analysis. From me, Homa Lezdin, our team here in Tehran, it's goodbye.